Good morning, children. Shubha teacher here. This is the second video of chapter seed, structure and its function. In the previous video, you had studied the basic structure of a dicot seed. Let's move on to the structure of maize grain. Maize grain consists of one cotyledon. Therefore, it is a monocot seed. Now let's see, this figure is showing the external view of the maize grain. Here, the lower portion, if you see, it looks roughly triangular, and the lower portion here at its narrow end is little light in color. This is showing the location of embryo, and the upper portion is little darker, which contains endosperm. Now, since endosperm is present in maize grain, so it is an endospermic seed. Here, this portion is showing the embryo, and the light portion is the embryo portion containing cotyledon along with it. Now, here is the internal structure of maize grain. Now, we start from the outermost portion and we'll go to the inner structures. Outermost externally is the protective layer, which is a joined layer of seed coat and fruit wall. In the previous video, if you remember, we had discussed what is a grain. A grain is a fruit in which seed coat and fruit wall is fused to form a common protective layer. Such a fruit is called a grain. So therefore, maize also is a grain because it has got seed coat and fruit wall both fused to form one single layer. Just inner to it is a layer called as aleurone layer. It is a rich proteinous layer just beneath the seed coat, the outer covering. And just inner to it, this broad portion is the endosperm. Endosperm occupies a major portion of this grain. And here it is rich with food and supplies nutrition to the embryo, which is located here. Now, this portion, the lower portion which you see here, this portion is the cotyledon portion. Cotyledon is thin here, and it has got a separate scientific name called as scutellum. Cotyledon of maize grain is called as scutellum. Now, cotyledon portion and endosperm portion is separated by a continuation of aleurone layer and is named as epithelial layer. Alright, I repeat, this layer which separates endosperm and scutellum is called as epithelial layer. Now, let's come to the embryo part. Embryo is located here along with the cotyledon. Embryo consists of, as usual, we had discussed in the previous video, embryo consists of a plumule and radicle. Now, plumule is here, and it is here. A separate thing to be noted in maize grain is plumule and radicle have got a protective covering. Here, if you see, this is the plumule, and there is a protective covering just above plumule, which is called as coleoptile. And this is radicle. It has a protective covering called as coleorhiza. Alright, the same plumule and radicle grows to form shoot and root respectively. Plumule grows into shoot and radicle grows into root after germination. Alright, so let's do a quick recap of the structures of maize grain, the parts of maize grain. Maize grain consists of an outer protective layer, which is a combined layer of seed coat and fruit wall, due to which it is called a grain. Inner to it is a protein-rich layer called as aleurone layer. This is inner to aleurone layer is a major portion at the broad end of maize grain containing endosperm, which supplies food to the embryo. Lower to endosperm is the cotyledon of maize grain called as scutellum. Endosperm and cotyledon are separated by a layer called as epithelial layer. Embryo consists of radicle and plumule. Plumule is protected by a covering called as coleoptile. Radicle is protected by a covering called as coleorhiza. Now let's move to the next slide to see what is germination of seeds. Germination is defined as the process of formation of a seedling developed from the embryo. We saw embryo in the previous slide. Embryo, after getting all the favorable conditions, it grows to form a seedling. That process of formation of a seedling developed from the embryo is called germination. Now here you see figures of two kinds of seeds. These are dormant seeds, and this is showing germinating seeds. Now one thing to be noted here is that a fresh seed normally does not germinate. Why? It has to undergo a period of dormancy, because during this dormancy period the physiological development takes place. So therefore, then it becomes, the embryo grows up to form a seedling out of it. Now let's see what are the conditions necessary for germination of seeds. There are three conditions which are necessary for the germination of seeds: water, suitable temperature, and oxygen. Water is required for swelling and rupturing of seed coat. What happens? Through micropyle, water enters into the seed and they swell. As a result, a pressure is exerted on the seed coat and seed coat ruptures. Then only the embryo grows, radicle and plumule forming shoot and root come out of the seed. And another reason for requirement of water is that the enzymes which are required to carry out various metabolic activities start acting when the food is in soluble form. So for the action of enzyme on the stored food also water is required. Second condition is suitable temperature. 25 to 35 degrees centigrade is the optimum temperature required for the germination of seeds. And oxygen is required for respiration, during which the food is oxidated, that is broken down to release energy, and with that energy only new cells are formed, and then a seedling grows up out of a seed. All right, so that's all for today, children. Let's do a quick recap. Today you learnt about the internal structure of maize grain. You came to know the difference between dormant and germinating seeds, and why do seeds undergo a period of dormancy, and what is germination and what are the conditions necessary for germination. That's all, children. Thank you, and please take care of yourself and stay safe.